few days ago, researchers in Switzerland announced the discovery of the Higgs boson. It's a subatomic particle. It explains where mass comes from in the universe. The important part is that it kind of caps off the explanation of what's called the Standard Model. It's the bestiary of subatomic particles that comprise the universe. And the exciting thing about this is that it's been predicted in theory for decades. So when human beings find the thing, it shows that we are actually capable as a species of apprehending the miracles of the universe around us. But I thought that the coverage of the discovery was a little bit weird. Not that it wasn't good. A lot of it really was, and I really don't want to get into a science journalism navel-gazing thing because we do a lot of that, and I wouldn't lead us down that rabbit hole. But I thought that it was a little bit like Arch. A lot of it had this tone, the mainstream stuff especially had this tone of like, oh, science, it's so hard, and it can be expensive, and what do we really get out of that? And you know, I've also been reading a lot of election year political journalism, indulging another Jones of mine, and that got me thinking about how those two things overlap. And which one of them is objectively, if you can put it this way, capital I, important. I've actually covered both things. I was a young, mediocre Washington journalist for a while, and I started to think back then that the big difference between political journalism and science journalism was that if you're doing science, pretty much anybody would talk to you. Scientists were excited to talk about their findings. The problem was understanding what they were telling you and then conveying it to readers, viewers, whatever, in an engaging and accurate and useful way. And it's kind of the converse with politics, where it was really hard to get anybody to tell you the truth on record. The fact is, though, that when they did, what they were saying tended to be sort of prosaic. At least that was my experience of doing that sort of coverage. So how did this play out? Well, when I was a reporter in the Washington Bureau for Newsweek, we all used to, at lunchtime, sit around a big round table and read the newspaper and talk about what the important stories were that day. Yeah, I know, newspapers and weekly news magazines and paper. I know, I'm 400 years old, sorry. But we'd sit around the table and people would say things like, oh, new political appointee, or oh, it's a, you know, here's this trial, how that's going. And one afternoon at lunch, I did the same thing. I looked at the paper and I said, hey, these scientists just launched a new kind of robot in the ocean that swims like a salmon. It's crickets. They looked at me like I was an alien, which of course I was, right? You know, to them, that kind of story, those dyed-in-the-wool, excellent, really high-level political reporters, to them, that sort of story had no bearing on people's everyday lives. Now, I know part of the problem is that when we write about things like the Higgs boson, we take up huge chunks of real estate in our stories with explanation, with boring exposition. And in political coverage, they kind of don't have to do that. In fact, if you were going to criticize political coverage, you'd say they aren't covering enough policy, they're covering the horse race, right? They're doing all the interesting drama. They never have to explain what a president is and how someone becomes president, where I'm back in the dust talking about the Standard Model and the bestiary of subatomic particles. But I think in my head, I'm always going to have the notion, at least, that the how the universe works stories are more important, for lack of a better word, than the how the political process works stories. At least until the election starts to come up, and then the trend lines move the other way, and I'll be reading the same political poll stories that you all will. But that's a statistics story, right? Just happens to have a political outcome.